Finding an owl in the woods is an absolute dream for birders. But once you find it, now you gotta identify it. So in this video, I go through all the owls of North America and show you how to identify them. Now this is part 2 of my owl series. Part 1, which you can go watch now, is how to find them. All my tips and tricks to find your own owl in the woods. Stay to the end, because I've got a top secret owl trick that I haven't told anybody yet.
These are burrowing owls, so they are common in their local area. Like if you go down to Florida, some of the city parks or some of the island communities, there'll be 100 burrowing owls throughout the neighborhood, and very common to see if you're in the right area. They build their home in golf courses, city parks, neighborhoods next to sidewalks, anywhere there's soft sand where they can burrow into. Yeah, their nests are under the ground. And what you see during the day is they're standing right next to their hole. Or they're right at the hole entrance, and then they pop up if you get nearby. Easy to see, easy to photograph. It's just finding out where they're nesting, and they're there. They are somewhat migratory. They do move around in the wintertime, but then in their local populations in California or Florida, they're year-round residents. So for these, the best is to just look on eBird, find out where their nesting locations are. It's typically not hidden, and you can drive up and get within 3-4 feet of their hole and get a good photograph. They're there. They're fun to watch, and their long legs. It's quite comical to see the burrowing owls. Barn owls, they get their name because you typically find them in abandoned buildings. They are found all over the world. They don't vary much, but what you do notice is how strikingly white they are. And when you see them in person flying, they look ghostly all white. They are strictly nocturnal. They are sleeping all day long, and it's typically either in an abandoned building or a barn or in a cave. That's where they slept before we had barns. And you can find them on all the continents except Antarctica. Just like the short-eared owl, they are widespread. In the U.S., they are more common in the South. And you'll most likely see them when you're driving in the dark and you see a flash of white in a field flying. That's a barn owl. You'll hear them. They make a high-pitched shriek, which terrifies you if you're not expecting that. Beautiful bird. And you can see that on the owls, they call them facial discs. The kind of the flat area surrounding the face there, helping to direct the sound to their ears, which are right there on the side of that facial disc. Long-eared owls get their name from their extremely long ears. It's almost like 2 exclamation marks straight up and down on the top of their head. Much more pronounced than the great horned owl, which may be the only other owl that has these tufts at the top that you might confuse the two. Great horned are much chunkier, fatter. The long-eared are kind of tall, skinny birds. And they flatten themselves and look even skinnier and taller when you see them, when you've discovered them and they know that they've been found. Also look for the yellow eyes. Sometimes it looks orange. But long-eared owls, they also love pine trees. And one thing I didn't mention at the beginning is when you're looking for owls, another clue to listen for is other birds. If they discover the owl during the day roosting and he's trying to sleep or she's trying to sleep, they will make a ruckus. They will squawk and call and mob the owl. And usually these are jays or crows or ravens or even chickadees. And they will cause a ruckus until that owl flies away. The other thing I wanted to mention is owl ethics. Some people are kind of unethical when they photograph owls by using bait, like a dead mouse or even a live mouse that they release right under the owl to try to encourage it to wake up and hunt, and then they'll photograph that. So this is unhealthy practices. The mice that you feed them could make the owl sick, depending on where you purchased the mouse, or if you had it frozen, whatever it was. It's just having the owl then depend on humans for food. And then also, if you expose the owl during the daylight, another predator, a hawk or a larger owl might come and hurt or disturb the owl. So it's just best to, if you find them, great, and that's the preferred method, but photograph them from a distance. Try not to disturb them too much. The way I figure is if the owl starts looking at you and notices you, you've come close enough. It's time to take your picture and back away. And you don't want to draw attention to the owl and have to have it fly away, which exposes itself to stress. Next owl, the short-eared owl, affectionately called the shorty. This is one that hunts during the daylight. Easy to photograph if you can find them. And they hunt usually about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours before sunset. I saw these last week. I guess it must have been about 3:30 in the afternoon and sunset at 5:30. So yeah, the last 2 hours of daylight, they're hunting, they're active. They've got a kind of a buoyant flight where they're up and down, kind of erratic. They're flying low over a farmer's field looking for mice. If you get into a patch of these, they're easy to photograph. They're not really worried about humans. They're focused on their food. It's a widespread owl all across the world. All 6 of the 7 continents have them. Even Hawaii, the Hawaiian Islands, has a short-eared owl population there. And you're like, wow, how did it get? Well, they fly across the ocean. Some ships have even been in the middle of the ocean, and a short-eared owl lands on their ship for a rest. So they are one of those owl species that moves. And they migrate. So they come down into lower Canada or the top of the U.S. in the wintertime, just chasing the mouse population. If there's not a lot of mice way up north, they'll come south until they can find them. Short-eared owls. You can't even see the ears on the top of their head. Nope. It's called short-eared, but you don't see them. Snowy owls, much like the short-eared, they come south in the wintertime, out of the Arctic, depending on they eat lemmings, the lemming population. If it's a bad year for lemmings, they'll migrate south into the U.S. I think last year we had one in California, even L.A.
How did a snowy owl that normally lives in the Arctic tundra end up amid the palm trees of Southern California?
They are widespread if they're looking for food. Bright white. Now the males, the whiter it is, the more likely it is to be a male. So like on the right here, there's not a lot of barring or marks. It's mostly white. That's a male. The female, and especially the young females, have all the black barring. So that's a female, and this is a male. And just notice the tufts of fur over their noses. It's because they're used to being in the cold in the Arctic. It's got more fur. Look at the fur on their claws there, on their legs. There's fur everywhere to keep it warm. That's the snowy owl, named after the snow. That's easy to remember. All white, snowy owl if it's not a barn owl. The great gray. Oh, the magical great gray. Everyone's favorite owl, and they're enormous. Enormous. The way I remember these is looks like they're wearing a tuxedo with a white bow tie at its neck. See in all the photos there with a black middle, the white bow tie, and then an X across the face. X-Man there. And usually with a completely surprised look on its face. They also nest way up north. They'll come down into Michigan, Minnesota, Sax-Zim-Bog, the southern Ontario, if we're lucky. Giant owl. They nest big. They'll take over a crow nest, so a big stick nest up high in a tree, or also a hollowed out stump if they can find one. Great gray owl. Everyone's looking for these. They're hard to find because eBird hides their sightings because so many people like to photograph them and disturb them, so they want to keep that population quiet. So really, if you stumble across one, or if you know somebody who tips you off that there's one in the area, they're worth tracking down. They're beautiful owls. Northern hawk owl. So this guy also is migratory. It comes down in the winter times. It's the time to see them. Also in southern Canada, northern the U.S. And they're a small owl. They look like an owl, but they act like a hawk. That's how it gets its name, the hawk owl. The way they perch, the way they sit, the way they hunt is like a hawk. But their face looks like an owl. The way I remember it, the way they look is, you see these two lines on their face there? It kind of, I call them like parentheses. So their name is the northern and then parentheses hawk owl. So that parentheses reminds me of the face shape where they have got those lines on the outside of their head. And then because they are small, you'll see the silhouette of these at a distance, typically sitting at the top of a tree on a snag just like this. So imagine this, but 500 feet away. And so all you'd see is this silhouette of standing on the top of this impossibly small snag. How is he even holding on? It's going to be a hawk owl. So look out for that. And it's got kind of a squared off head. Boreal owl. So same size of a saw-whet, just a little bit. So these are like 10 inches tall, and the saw-whet's about 8 inches. So really small, right? The size of a can of Coke. But their heads are rounder than the saw-whets, and they've got the facial disc here, where it's kind of outlined here, like that. You see those dark outlines, and then the kind of the gray silver insides. And look at that saw-whet, right? There's no frame. And remember that flux capacitor, that white triangle there in the middle? The Boreal Owl doesn't have it. So these guys are also migratory. You see them in the wintertime when they come south. And other thing to look at is the dots on the back. So the saw-whet kind of has the dots in a line, whereas the Boreals have more of a uniform pattern of the dots on the back. Boreal Owl. The saw-whets doesn't look like in this picture, but their eyes are much bigger than the Boreal Owls. The saw-whets have giant eyes, and the Boreal not as big. You can see this in this picture. Even though the eyes are open, it's smaller compared to the head. That's it for the owls.
I can't wait to read your comments about all the owls you've seen and that you were able to identify because of this video. Now here's my secret trick. When you go to Florida looking for a burrowing owl, go to the city parks or the neighborhoods and look for the roped off areas. That roped off area signifies there's a burrowing owl nest right there. Now, please subscribe because I'm going to be putting videos out like this every week with either bird ID tips or my birding adventures. Follow along.